All right. Thanks for coming, and thanks to those that are online. We appreciate it. We're excited to give you a great opportunity today. There's this little mic right here that we're going to be able to pass around as you guys have any questions, so that the people online can also hear your questions. So wait for the mic to get passed around. And I'm super excited for this because Sam has a lot of value, especially in the land development space. As you guys are venturing down the land development space, this is really important that you understand what a PID is and how PIDs work and what the benefits and what size and scope and when. And I think that I'm not going to steal Sam's thunder, but DA Davidson is for sure a juggernaut, and they're really good at what they do. So I'm going to kind of pass the time over to Sam and let him introduce himself and what DA Davidson does and PID. And then as you guys have questions, you can raise your hands and we'll come and find you with the mic here. So there's some interaction. Does that work, Sam?
Sounds great.
Cool, great. Everybody, Sam.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We haven't even heard what I'm about to say yet, so I wouldn't clap just yet. I hate presenting and standing up here and just talking. So I will make it as interactive as you guys want. If it's so boring, I'm just going to talk for like 45 straight minutes. So I suggest that you guys ask questions as we go through this, but I'm excited to be in front of you guys all today to give you guys a 101 on some unique tools that have been passed in the state of Utah to help real estate development and are being utilized throughout the state in a substantial way since they were passed in 2019. Just as a quick intro, my name's Sam Elder. I work at DA Davidson. We're an investment bank that specializes really in underwriting municipal bonds. So historically, DA Davidson will go to a city, a school district, a university, a charter school, and go issue bonds to raise them capital to do whatever they do. And there's one small little niche space within the municipal bond world called a special district. And it's really to raise money for real estate developments through the municipal bond market. So my background is working at Goldman Sachs. I sat on a municipal bond desk trading municipal bonds. And then DA Davidson was wanting to expand from their really focus was on the Intermountain West, but in Colorado where these tools were available, wanted to expand into Utah and pulled my colleague and me over from Goldman to help run this business. And so since then we kind of been really building up this new tool and trying to educate real estate developers, the public, the state, the cities, the counties, et cetera, about how these tools can be useful to deliver monumental projects across the state of Utah. And at the end of the presentation, I'll go in and show you guys some case studies of some different deals that we've done in the past. How's it going, guys? So we'll start with just an overview of a PID and an IFD. We'll get into some of the bond types and how they work, and then we'll get into the case studies as discussed. So how to start? A special district is a quasi-governmental entity that has the ability to issue tax-exempt debt. What that means is that the investor on the other side that's lending their money is not going to have to pay taxes on their interest that they receive. And because of that, they're willing to lend at a lower rate. This was given as a way for municipalities or local school districts to raise money at a more efficient capital rate. So it's almost like a stipend to them, so they can borrow at a lower rate to deliver what they need to deliver. So a special district is a governmental entity that's separate from the city or the county, but has the ability still to access tax-exempt debt. So to get cheaper forms of financing to pay for certain improvements. A public infrastructure district, the acronym is a PID, is a quasi-governmental entity to issue bonds for real estate development. And it can raise money in a number of different ways. It was passed in 2019 It's relatively new. It's been around for 5 or 6 years, but is being utilized. In fact, a lot of people in this room either will know somebody or are buying property in a public infrastructure district and is going to be subject to the implications of that. An IFD is an acronym, is called an infrastructure financing district, was passed in 2014 and was a way for these districts to get created without municipality approval as long as they were restricted to a certain use. And I'll get into that in just a second. The idea and purpose behind what these tools were meant to do was to fund new growth without impacting the municipality's balance sheet. Let me talk about that for a second. Historically speaking, real estate development for regional improvements on master plan communities was funded by the municipalities, meaning they would tax their citizens to expand roads, right, for new development to come into their city or their county, into their jurisdiction. And over time, that burden has shifted onto real estate developers. So started out municipalities saying, look, we need to build a bigger sewer line to be able to service more housing in our city in the future. Therefore, we are going to bond and raise money to put in these improvements, and then we'll, get money through impact fees over time to repay us. And that burden shifted onto the real estate developers as that shifted. And you can't blame the municipalities. They don't want to tax their citizens to pay for improvements. And so the idea was, it's getting so difficult for real estate developers to finance offsite improvements. So an example for master plan communities is you have to do, let's call it $15 to $20 million worth of improvements before you can deliver one home. And you got to rely on some lender that's willing to give you $20 million up front without having one collateral piece to repay them $20 million. And then they got to finance all the other improvements to deliver unit after unit to repay them back the $20 million plus whatever else they lent. So it was becoming really difficult for real estate developers to be able to fund these improvements. And so we said, what are different ways that we can bring in unique tools to the state to fund those improvements that the banks aren't willing to fund? And that's by going to the capital markets. So to stop and backtrack for just a second, these tools have been around for decades in other states. In Florida, they're called CDDs. In Colorado, they're called metro districts. In California, they're called CFDs or Mello-Roos. In Texas, PIDs. In Idaho, CIDs. They're named a bunch of different things across a bunch of different states to do one thing, and that's, sorry.
1 second. I don't know if
that was me. I clicked a button.
Was it you? Okay.
I got so excited. I was like, I gotta hit this thing. So different acronyms across different states to do this exact same thing. And what it is to say, rather than the existing citizens of a city paying for the improvements of future growth, allow the future growth to pay itself. And so they created these tools that allowed real estate developers to access the tax-exempt market without impacting the local municipality's balance sheet, meaning they didn't need to fund it. They didn't need to support the debt service. And then also they could create this entity that they would step away from and have no liability back to. So in the event that the developer failed to produce what was projected in the bond model, the municipality didn't have to step in and cover that shortfall or be sued in the event that something went wrong. So these are separate governmental entities that can issue tax-exempt debt. Finance better infrastructure. So the Daybreak project out in South Jordan was built on an assessment bond. Before these tools were created, there was a special district created and they imposed assessment liens on those properties within Daybreak to pay for those improvements, which what created that environment that you see out in Daybreak today. The idea is that if you're gonna put these tools in place, then finance better improvements, expand roads earlier, build parks on the front end of your development, right? So you have the amenities as people move in, rather than waiting for those sales to take place. The third thing is to optimize development. So a lot of the times people will go piecemeal, right? So these developers will say, I can't get $20 million of money up front to do all these improvements, to build this park, to expand this road. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a smaller road today. I'm going to build a pocket park in the corner, and then I'm going to start doing some houses. I'm going to start selling those homes or those lots. Then I'm going to get revenue to then fund those other improvements on the back end of the development. This tool allows you to bring all the money forward to today to put in the improvements up front, right, to do the development. So it does optimize development. The other thing too, and all the real estate developers I think can really account for this, is that the improvement cost to go in and rip it up and do it later, or to expand a pipe after you've already done one, gets significantly more expensive. If you can do it all up front, you would. It's way more efficient. Borrowing that money though is extremely challenging. And then growth pays for growth. So once again, rather than the city or county having to raise taxes or use impact fees and other things to pay for these improvements, the citizens that move into the boundaries of the project area will essentially pay for those improvements. I'm gonna stop there. Any questions on that so far? Are we kind of getting the gist of what I'm saying? Partially making sense? Okay, so we talked about this for just a little bit. What I'm going to explain here now is what a PID can do to raise the money, which is like what will access is the tax exempt market, sure, but how does it raise money? So the municipal bond market is a $4 trillion market. The space within the high yield market, which is really risky debt, meaning you're going to get a high rate of return for investing in a project really early on, is still fairly large. Meaning there's a ton of capital that frankly before 2019 was not flowing into the state of Utah. It was going to Florida, it was going to Texas, it was going to California, it was going to Colorado, it was going to all these states to do these improvements and not coming in here. And when we passed this public infrastructure district tool in 2019, it opened up that $4 trillion market to come into Utah and invest in the infrastructure that we need here, and is going to be instrumental in putting in the infrastructure for the 2034 Olympics. So a public infrastructure district has the power to do a few different things. One has the power to impose taxes. This is one of the contradicting things about public infrastructure districts where some people don't like them. So they can actually impose an additional property tax above and beyond your existing property tax. So what happens is a real estate developer of a master plan community will come in and say, I'm the property owner right now. I'm going to consent that we impose an additional tax above and beyond my existing tax here in this area on my property. And then when I sell it, I'm going to get everyone else to consent. So a buyer that comes in and wants to buy property within a public infrastructure district or within a project is going to be subject to an additional tax, but they're going to be disclosed that they're subject to that additional tax just like they would an HOA. And so you're going to know I'm buying property within a public infrastructure district. In fact, there's a spot for it on the MLS. It's in your title report. It's going to show up when you go get your mortgage on a separate colored piece of paper. It's in the sales offices of the different buildings as you go to these projects to make sure that buyers are informed that they're subject to the additional tax. But the concern is always, just like it is with an HOA, is you're going to buy property within a public infrastructure district and someone's not going to know. And guess what? They're going to go knock on the county and city's door and say, why are my taxes higher than my neighbors? And that's what the counties and cities are concerned with, right? Is imposing additional taxes and someone not knowing about it. So what a public infrastructure district does, and what we do as investment bankers, is we say, let's give an example of a master plan community, and we got a few in the room. So let's use Arrowhead. There's a project down in Salem called Arrowhead. It's a PID. It's on there's about 1,500 units ish. The first bond is sized against about 800 units. So there's not one unit going that's completed yet to date. What we're going to go do is we're going to say they're going to build 800 units, and it's going to take them 6 years to build these units. They have a townhome product, they have a single family product, and they have a multifamily product within this development. And we have an absorption schedule, and it says they're going to deliver this many homes in 2025, 11. They're going to build in 2026, 80. They're going to build in 2029, 150. And we're going to project out, using a third-party market study report, what they're going to build in that development. And then we're going to say there's an additional tax applied to whatever the assessor is going to assess that home at. So let's just say you build a $500,000 home, right, in that area. It's subject to an additional 0.5% of taxes, or what they say 5 mils. 10 mils is 1%. So we're going to put an additional 0.5% of property taxes on a $500,000 home. And you're going to get taxed on that for 30 years. We're going to project out all that development, and then we're going to say those tax collections each year over the next 30 years are going to be Y, and we're going to bring all that money forward to today to put in the infrastructure to actually go vertical to create the development that we guarantee to bondholders as a payment of return. And bondholders are willing to take that risk, meaning they're saying, I believe that developer is going to build X, Y, and Z over the next 10 years, and if they do, I'll be repaid. But that homeowner who buys property within that district is going to pay 0.5% on the assessed value of their home. Now, what does that look like? I'll kind of get there in just a second, but let's just skip. This might be a bad idea. Let's skip there. So, and it disappears when it hits the screen. Now these fancy TVs, by the way. So, if in Utah, if it's your primary residential home, you're only taxed at 55% of its market value. So if you buy a home for $500,000 and it's your primary residence, you're only taxed on $275,000. So 0.5% on $275,000 is $1,375 a year, or about $110-ish a month of additional payment you're going to make if you buy property within that district. If it's your secondary home, you're actually taxed at 100% of its market value. So that impact to a secondary home buyer would be $2,500 a year. So that's the impact that you're talking about when you're imposing 5 mils on a $500,000 home in the state of Utah. Once again, similar to an HOA, the developer or home builder has to be very sensitive to what additional tax they're willing to impose, because at some point in time it impacts the marketability of their home. Just like it would be for an HOA, some people don't want to buy property within an HOA, so they walk across the street to some place that doesn't, right? Same thing will be happening here in the state. Some people won't want to buy property within a public infrastructure district. But the idea is when you go look at the community that you're buying in, you're okay paying an additional $100 a month, seeing what you're getting in return, which is back to that better infrastructure. As I go back, I'm stopping. Questions?
What's the percentage? What's the rate of it failing? The bond doesn't get paid back?
Yeah, the question is, what is the rate that these bonds fail? Difficult question to answer, but not as bad as you would think. The municipal bond market is a very secure market, relatively speaking. So if you were to go look at the amount of failed construction loans from banks relative and from hard money lenders relative to public infrastructure districts, the failure would probably be far greater in those spaces than it would be in this. A lot of these deals are they are structured in a way that can withstand slowdowns and still pay, right? So if they only build out to 60% of the pace that was projected in this third-party market study, it would still pay. That's the idea, is that bondholders they're willing to take a substantial amount of risk, but to a certain point, right? And so,
What if they get to 60%? The time just goes further. So instead of 30 years, it's 40 years.
Great question, and it's in the bond structures, which is like 15 minutes down the road probably. But the answer is the tax is imposed for 30 years. The bond's structured around a 30-year collection. In the event that the bonds don't pay by 30 years, that tax can run out for 10 more years before it goes away, regardless of whether it's repaid the bonds or not. So bondholders at that point are taking the risk that after those 10 years, it shuts off and the district dissolves. So the idea is that this doesn't remain outstanding in perpetuity. It's just there to repay debt service. It's a financing vehicle. And when that debt service is repaid, it goes away. One other element that's really important. When we project out 809 units being built over time, up front to raise money, there's a lot of risk that Is that going to happen or is it not going to happen, right? But eventually you have 809 unique property owners living within an area, each paying an additional tax. And it becomes a mini city. So the credit of that deal, the strength of its, let's call it credit rating, goes up substantially. And so the interest rate at which investors are willing to lend goes way down. And the structure at which they're willing to do it changes. It gets more favorable to the borrower, right? So in that particular instance, the PID is governed by the property owners and their designees. So up front, it's the real estate developer, because they're the landowner, and their designees. But just like an HOA, it transitions to the homeowners over time. So eventually the 809 homeowners within this arrowhead example that I'm giving you will be on the board, will make up the board of the PID, and will decide what to do with when they issue bonds. So they'll go back and refinance the debt and lower the mill levy. So if they go out at 5 mils and that impact is 1375 or whatever it was annually, they'll go and lower the rate to 3 mils, right, to reduce their impact to them today. And they have one of 3 options, actually. We've seen them all be used. One, the most common. When you go refinance the debt as the property owners, you can lower the mill levy, you can shorten the debt, meaning, and rather than have it run out for 30 years, we'll have it run out for 20, or you can raise new money. So some people will put in public pools in their neighborhood, right, by raising new money to keep their taxes the same. But almost always they reduce their mill levy. And the reason why is because nobody knows whether they're going to live in their home for another 20 years. So why not reduce the impact to me today versus reducing it to somebody else that I might sell it to in the future? Good questions. Anything else? Keep going. So that's just the tax bond. That's one version, and I'm going to skip the other versions because I'm going to talk about bond structure later on. What I want to say is that a PID, there is some nuances to this depending on what type of bond you issue, but is mainly used to pay for public improvements only. Public parks, public roads, public utilities such as your water and your sewer, right? Public trails, etc. It's not meant to be used to pay for vertical construction of someone's home, right, or some private amenity. So because it is a governmental entity, its purpose is to pay for public improvements. And some of those are identified here: streets, water, traffic, sanitation, etc. Okay, so we kind of talked about this a little bit. PID was formed in 2019 under Senate Bill 228, if you want to look up something before you go to bed. And it can only be created by the county or city that has land jurisdiction. So if you're in the city of Salem or you're in Utah County, unincorporated Utah County, you have to go to the county commissioners or the city council members to seek approval for a district to be created. Without that, a PID does not exist. So the elected officials of the city that the citizens live in are electing are ultimately deciding whether one of these tools gets created or not. And they also have the ability to govern the power of the tool. So statutorily speaking, a PID can do a lot of things. But the local municipality that has land jurisdiction can limit that even further into a box. And that's what we call a governing document. There are special authorities that have been created in the state that can create PIDs. Utah Inland Port Authority, probably heard of them. The Point of the Mountain State Land Authority, right next door, has the ability to do it. Utah Fair Park, and MIDA, or the Military Installation Development Authority. You've probably seen a lot of the stuff that they've done on the Wasatch back for the extension of Deer Valley, called Deer Valley East now by Jordanelle, as well as all the hotels. There's the Grand Hyatt and other things that are happening in and around that resort. So lots of development happening through MIDA, as well as the Inland Port Authority, and the Point of the Mountain recently issued their first bond through a PID. Once again, PIDs are governed by the landowners and their designees, ultimately gets transitioned to the future property owners of the district, and they become elected officials. To form a PID, you had to submit a petition, an LOI to the city saying we're requesting one of these, and then you got to submit a governing document that they review that outlines the parameters and how the tool can be utilized. Let me give you an example. A PID has the ability to issue up to 15 mils of additional taxes. That's 1.5% more of taxes in addition to what you're already paying. The average tax rate across the Wasatch Front here is about 10 mils or 1%. So by doing this, you're more than doubling their taxes. No real estate developer on a for-sale residential product could sell a home with 15 mils on it. It would really impact the buyer's ability to go get mortgages, right? And their ongoing payment would be pretty burdensome. The sweet spot has been requested somewhere between 3 and 6 mils. 3 on the lower end to 6 on the higher end for sale residential is what we've seen. But the reason PIDs have the ability to go up to 15 mils is, what about a developer that wants to impose a tax on himself for a long-term asset that they intend to hold? So developer is building a hotel or a multifamily asset or an office building, right? Why can't they impose an additional 15 mils on themselves, because they're going to be the taxpayer of that building, right? And just self-finance it through a tax over 30 years versus getting a traditional construction loan that may be 2 years, right? They want long-term debt with less recourse to them. So we've seen developers for commercial assets that they intend to hold long-term impose 15 mils. But the city or county has control. And we've seen counties say, I'm not going to let you impose more than 5 mils, right? And I'm not going to let you raise more than this much money. And I'm not going to let you pay for certain improvements, right? So they can restrict that box to allow them to use the tool for what's beneficial or what they want to see within their city or county. Questions on that?
What resistance, if any, do you see from municipalities or government agencies to do PID? Sure. What resistance, if any, are you seeing from municipalities or government entities to do a PID?
Yeah, depends on the jurisdiction. I think it differs throughout the state. There's been a lot of PIDs created in the state now. I think close to 150 public infrastructure districts are now spanning the state, all with different provisions that allow them to do different things and different restrictions. There's been certain municipalities that have been more reluctant to provide a public infrastructure district, have been pretty against a public infrastructure district. And then there's others that are saying, this is the way to finance improvements going forward. I'm tired of taxing my citizens to pay for these types of improvements over time. So I think that changes. I think also municipalities, so the tax is a big issue. I'll just say that for the most part. People are very reluctant to give someone the ability to impose taxes, right? The second part of it is it requires additional work for the staff of the county and the city. And no blame to them. It requires them to do something. It's like, do I want to create a tool that's going to create more work, right? So whether that's the reason that you shouldn't create it or not is a separate question. I'm not going to answer that. Everyone has their own personal opinion. But that is a reason why you might get some reluctance on these tools. The other thing is, let's just say that some bad apples in the real estate development world have harmed the image of real estate developers to municipalities, meaning municipalities, I think some of them are hurt by what other people have promised and not delivered in their municipalities over time, and therefore have a bad rap. So that's one of the reasons they say, I don't want to give a tool that's going to help developers. You go finance it through some private means. You've been doing it for decades. Why can't you do it now? And the idea is that the dynamic of the real estate world has shifted, right? And it's not the same as it once was. Good question. Here's just a creation timeline. You submit these petitions and LOIs and governing documents. This is more for you guys to review after the fact if you want to see kind of the process. But it's just all the little things that you would have to do to get a district created. And it typically takes about 3 to 4 months before you can get the city council to or county commissioners to vote yes or no on whether they want this for a project in their city and county. And think there are some things that municipalities want. They say, if I'm going to give you a tool that gives you the ability to do X, Y, and Z, then what are you going to give me in return? I want a wider road that I needed, or I want a larger sewer improvement, or I want a bigger park, or I want some pickleball courts added, right? So a lot of them are asking for those things. The one challenge to that, or one thing that people are pushing back a little bit on the municipalities, is that the people within the development that are paying the taxes are paying for those amenities, and yes, they're going to live in that community and most likely use those amenities, but so is everybody else in the city too. And should the one development be impacted to pay for all these other things the city wants for their citizens, and the other citizens not have to pay for them? That's, I think, one of the challenges with PIDs and paying for improvements that are outside of its realm. In fact, some cities have said, I want you to pay for this amenity that's on 2 miles away from the development that you're imposing the tax on. And you're like, how is that fair to the people that are paying the taxes here? Okay, so what is an IFD? So a PID has the ability to issue also, I'm going to go back to the PID, and an assessment bond. An assessment bond is a little different. An assessment bond is similar to a property tax, but it's a fixed payment for the life of the deal. So going back to the tax, if you impose an additional 0.5% of taxes on the assessed value, well, your assessed value fluctuates year over year. You guys have seen your tax bill. It comes in and they say, hey, your home is now worth $750,000. Last year it was $700,000. Well, you got to pay taxes on $750,000 now, right? Because your home value went up, right? With an assessment bond, it can be fixed, a fixed payment for the life of the deal. So it's a 30-year maturity, and it just amortizes like a mortgage. But rather than it be a monthly payment, it's just an annual or semi-annual payment that's made by the homeowner. What's unique about an assessment bond relative to a property tax bond for the buyer is that it's prepayable at any time with no penalty. So you can't go on the property tax bond and say, you know what, I don't want this additional tax on my house anymore. I'm going to pay it off. Can't do it. An assessment bond, you can say, this payment's on here right now, I'm getting rid of it. Bam, and you can prepay it. So Daybreak is a perfect example of that. They imposed an assessment lien on the properties, and then when people go get their mortgage, they just pay the assessment lien down in their mortgage. So the buyer has no ongoing payment. All they have is their mortgage. So it allows you to essentially not pass any burden on to the homeowner, but still gives you the ability to access tax-exempt debt. We were going to municipalities as well as other development, really representing development groups, and asking them to provide a PID that has the ability to only issue assessment bonds. So we said, I know you don't like the additional tax burden on the homeowner, but what if we did in an assessment bond, but when we sold the home or the lot, we prepaid the assessment lien down so the homeowner would have no idea that it would ever existed. And the municipalities, some of them said no. So some real estate developers were like, why are we not being able to borrow money that has no impact to the municipality and has no impact to the homeowners? Why can't we have some tool that's going to help us access a tax-exempt market that's massive and is going to help us more efficiently finance homes and real estate development and therefore deliver more opportunities for people to buy? And so the state stepped in and said, we'll create a tool that bypasses the approval process of the city, as long as that assessment lien is prepaid at certificate of occupancy at the latest. So this burden will never be passed on to a residential homeowner. So it was passed in 2024 and have been issued a bunch now throughout the state in certain municipalities that have been a little bit more reluctant to do the PID. Questions on the IFT? Luke?
You said it's paid off at C of O. So does that mean the developer is going to have to pay for it out of their pocket
Yeah.
still? So
Yeah, for a real estate developer, we call this a glorified construction loan. And the reason why we call it glorified is it's tax exempt, there's no personal guarantees required, and it's a 30-year maturity. So if you go get traditional finance from a bank to do construction, it's typically a 24-month, 12, 24, 36-month term. You as a developer, as an executive, have to personally guarantee your assets to support that debt. And it's at taxable interest rates. So this one allows you to have it over a longer period of time, so you can carry a project longer before that term of that loan ends. It allows you not to have to personally guarantee the debt, and you're able to get tax-exempt interest rates, which is lower than what the banks are lending. So real estate developers are using this tool to do improvements in a more efficient way than they would by going to a regional bank, right? But the one nuance to this versus a private loan is it can only be used for public improvements. So once again, if you got a bunch of private infrastructure costs, you want a private park, you want a private amenity such as like a pool or clubhouse or something, or you are doing electrical power and gas are private in Utah for the most part, you can't pay for those improvements with these bonds, and therefore still need construction debt privately to do it.
So, clarification question. I guess who would pay it off? Like, would the new homeowner coming in pay it off, or?
So so there's two types of developers for the most part, I would say. One that sells lots, or one that sells homes. They're a developer and home builder, or you're just a developer. You do the improvements, you sell it to a home builder. Typically what we've seen is a master developer that sells lots will at lot sell to the home builder, prepay the lien so that the home builder has nothing on their lots. For a home builder that's going to sell a home to an end user or a homeowner, they typically pay it off at certificate of occupancy.
With their own money.
With their own money. The sale from, well, typically it's really interesting. It's like they have to do it right then, and then the home closes and the money from the homeowner comes to pay them back. It was written in a way that was, in my opinion, a little backwards. It could just have happened at sell.
Yes.
Right? But what they wanted to ensure is that there was no assessment lien possibility, or no assessment lien passed on to the homeowner. No possibility of that happening. So let's do it a little bit earlier at certificate of occupancy.
Got it.
Good question. This is the process. You still have to go to the county. You got to get this plat. You have to have 100% property owner consent. Once again, just to recap, on a PID, you cannot have one without 100% property owner consent. So if we wanted to go say, hey, look at these homes up here, we'll go put a PID on these up here, and we'll reimburse the master developer who did this project 8 years ago for their public improvements. Well, none of those homeowners are going to consent to that additional tax, right? You got to have 100% property owner consent to be part of a district. So this just goes, it's about this, the IFD creation process is about 3 months.
Is that like best case scenario? Because I'm sure if you get pushed back, you get.
Yeah, 60 days is best case scenario. Yeah.
Hey, back to that C of O comment. If you're building a spec and you get a C of O, does it still have to transfer right then?
Yeah, you want to wait to get your
just
certificate of
hold off
occupancy,
until you-
hold off on getting it so you don't have to make that payment.
Roger that.
Yep. Yeah, we can talk about that later. Okay, the bond types. We talked about limited tax bonds. That's an additional tax above and beyond your existing tax. We talked about the impact in terms of taxation and what the homeowner would pay over time. We talked about assessment bonds being a little bit unique. One element of the assessment bonds is that your borrowing capacity is pretty strong. It's 33% of the appraised value of the land as if improved. So, let me give you an example. You have a raw piece of dirt with no improvements in. It's worth something. We call that the as-is value of the property. And then You go and do all the horizontal improvements. Let's say that's a $20 million cost. If you wanted to sell that at that point, it'd be worth a lot more, right? Because you've gotten it to a point that's closer to being able to go vertical. You can go get an appraisal on the property today that's not improved as if it's improved. So you can say, tell me what the value of this property would be if we did all the horizontal improvements. You can borrow 1/3 of that value. It is actually allowed by statute to do 1/3 of any improved value as long as you show you have the capital means to get it from the as-is condition to the as-improved condition. One example of this that we borrowed against the vertical value of an asset is down at Black Desert. And I'll get into that in just a second. But we borrowed against the finished home value, not against the finished land value. They're structured with 3 years of capitalized interest typically. All capitalized interest means is pre-funded interest payments. So imagine you got a mortgage and you said, rather than paying any principal for the first 3 years off of this home, I only want to pay interest for 3 years. And guess what, lender? I want you to fund it. But lender is going to have a larger loan amount outstanding on your home because you didn't make any principal payments for the first 3 years. So they're willing to give you a higher loan amount, right? But they're going to pre-fund their first 3 years of interest. The reason why they do that for these types of development is because master developers and home builders don't have revenue events until 2 or 3 years down the road, right? They have to do all the horizontal improvements to get revenue. And these lenders don't want developers or borrowers to have to make payments on their debt until they start having revenue events, because they're saying then they just have to come out of their own pocket. And they don't want to have any potential ramifications of having to foreclose on their property. So different from property tax bonds, assessment bonds have a lien on the land. Meaning if you miss an assessment payment when it's due, you're in default and these lenders can foreclose on your property. One interesting thing that might be for some lenders, if they're in the room, is it doesn't take away your first deed of trust. So this might get a little deep. So if what I'm saying doesn't make sense, just ignore it. These bonds cannot be accelerated. What that means is if they lend you $30 million over a 30-year time period, to amortize that, you're paying $1 million plus interest every year to get rid of that debt, essentially. In the event that you fail to make an assessment payment, the bondholders can only foreclose and require that the $1 million plus interest be due in that year. They cannot foreclose and accelerate $30 million of debt. So a construction lender that actually sits subordinate to this debt is only subordinate to the annual revenue amount in that year. They're not subordinated to the entire $30 million. So what they'll do is they'll make $1 million plus interest payment, the lender that sits behind it, they'll foreclose on the property, accelerate its debt, and then they'll sell that property to a developer with or without this assessment lien on it. Once again, they can get rid of it at par at any time with no penalty. They can, yep. They either inherit it and keep making assessment payments on it, which is probably lower cost of capital than theirs, or they pay it down and at par and use whatever other plans of finance they have. Buys what? The bond? The bond's already sold. Oh yeah, no one sell. Then the lender that had the first deed of trust that foreclosed on it is going to have to keep making these assessment payments, or they're going to lose out on all their money, right, to get repaid. Good question. So once again, these sit senior to anything. The property tax bond, on the other hand, is really unique. The obligation of a property owner is to make additional tax payment, let's say it's 0.5%, on whatever the assessed value of the property is. It's not to pay debt service. So let me give you an example. Let's just say on the property tax bond that we said 809 units were going to be built over the next 7 years, and only 100 of them were built over that same 10-year time period. The assessed value of that property is really low because they haven't gone vertical and created that value. As long as you pay that 5 mils or 0.5% on the assessed value, you're not in default regardless of whether it's paying scheduled debt service or not. So tons of downside risk protection on the property tax bonds that these ones don't have. Any questions on assessment bonds and property tax bonds before we go into an even more complicated thing? How am I looking on time? I didn't bring a watch today.
You're good, Sid. Go ahead. This is great content. Go ahead.
Okay, if anybody wants to walk out, I'm not offended by all means. I know we got things to do. A CRA is a community reinvestment area. These have been around for a really long time as well, and are ways to incentivize certain real estate developments that the municipalities want within their jurisdiction. All a CRA is a remittance of tax. So, let me give you an example. So, does anybody know the project down in St. George called Tech Ridge? It's a big commercial tech hub that they're trying to build on the old St. George Airport site. So it sits up on the plateau by Bluff Street, right up there on the top. They're trying to create this tech vibe that we're seeing down here, up here in Silicon Slopes. The idea is that the land value is worth something today, but it's going to be really difficult to get that project off the ground because you're building something that hasn't had enough support to say it's going to work or not. And so the improvement cost, the amount of risk that the developer's taking to try to get this to work is meaningful. And right now the site's not worth much today. It's an old airport. There's some hangars on it, right? So it's not really generating a lot of taxes. But if they create an office space and retail shop and all this kind of stuff, it's going to create a lot of taxes to the city and help the city over time be able to do much more. They're going to be able to generate a ton of revenue. The city and the other taxing entities like the school district, the county, et cetera, can say, if you go and create, let's say it's worth $10 million today. If you go create $100 million of value, we will give you a certain amount of our taxes back to you for a certain amount of years on the $90 million of increment that you've created. So you've created $90 million more of value than it was at where it is today. And I'm going to give you 75% of my taxes for 20 years for you to go try to build this out and make it happen. Because after 20 years, I'm going to get 100% of those taxes again on something that wouldn't have otherwise existed if I didn't give you something. So it's a public-private partnership. It's two people coming together and saying, how can we create a cool project? And is there a way to do this? In fact, if you go and see all the Targets and Costco's and Walmarts and things like that coming into the city that generates a ton of sales tax, which helps the city a lot, almost always is there some tax increment incentive granted to those companies to bring them here. So municipalities do this all the time. This is a reallocation of the taxes that we are paying, but to bring in more taxable value. Because if you bring in more taxable value, guess what your property tax is going to do? Going to go down, right? Here's one of the interesting things, and especially happens in small cities, is the residential homeowners are like, we don't want growth here. We don't care about it, right? But to pay for improvements, your taxes have to go up every year because it's expensive to operate a city just based on residential property tax collections. In fact, you're in a deficit if you're only collecting on residential. So commercial properties such as hotels that generate transient room taxes, retail shops, you can think of your grocery stores and your restaurants, etc. They generate sales taxes, right? In addition to property taxes, then go back to the city to help them actually be able to lower the tax burden on their homeowners because they're collecting better taxes on another asset. So they're trying to incentivize certain developments within their area. The purpose of that is really that a PID can monetize against that future revenue stream. So once again, we can say it's 10 million today, but here's what the developer is going to build. They're going to build this awesome project. It's going to generate tons of taxes. Guess what? Take that risk. Let's bring all that money back to today to do the improvements to actually create the incremental value. So before a PID was created, a CRA would issue bonds on behalf of the developer. So the city or county would issue bonds against that future incremental growth and go access the markets. But once again, if the developer didn't deliver what was promised, the city would have to find other means in their balance sheet, whether they're general fund or other revenue that they have available, to make up the shortfall. A PID is essentially rid themselves from having to do that. So this is how it works. You have a base property value, let's just say what it's worth today, and then you got incremental value that you create. These taxing entities will still get 100% of the base value, but they'll give up 75% of the incremental growth value they get, but they'll keep 25% during the term of 20 or 25 years. Once that 20 or 25 years elapses, they get 100% of the money. The developer gets nothing at that point. Questions on CRAs? This might be my last slide, and then case studies. Talked a little bit about it. This is kind of the last thing. We've raised Black Desert about $440 million worth of debt through these types of tools, generating a substantial amount of infrastructure improvements that you now can go see as you go watch the PGA Tour, which is coming up next month. So huge opportunity to see this project. Frankly, there just wasn't hard money or lenders that were willing to take that substantial amount of risk that the capital markets were to be able to deliver something of that size and scope out in Ivins, Utah. Olympia is a large residential project in Harriman leading up to the copper mine. The first bond was issued on the first 1,000 units-ish, and utilized a PID to do some of the horizontal improvements. Nordic Village, they're redoing or developing a lot of the base of the Nordic ski resort. This is Clyde Company's bond. Wood Ranch out in West Jordan, these guys were former partners at Daybreak and did a lot of the Daybreak development that you're seeing, creating something very similar out in West Jordan. It's branded for you guys Terrain. You could go look up some stuff, but really neat infrastructure, trails, connectivity similar to Daybreak happening out in West Jordan. This is just a commercial project in Tooele called 10th and Main. These are just a few examples. Arrowhead, we talked about 809 units out at Arrowhead. One of the unique element about this deal is that they're building roughly a $30 million park. It's just extremely expensive. So the tax bonds are approved by the municipality to be able to pay for that park that wouldn't otherwise be feasible. So lots of movement happening there on the park as we speak. Talked about Tech Ridge, which is, you can see 1.1 million square feet of office. A massive amount of office space, residential, retail, et cetera, up there on the plateau. We recently issued nearly $1 billion of bonds for the Smith Entertainment Group for the renovation of the Delta Center for the Utah Mammoth and Utah Jazz. So once again, a PID was utilized as a vehicle to issue bonds for that project without impacting the local municipality, Salt Lake City. One unique element to this is a PID, we didn't talk about this, but can impose other fees. In this particular instance, there's an additional 0.5% sales tax charged to a certain area within Salt Lake City to pay for the improvements. You can go read about it in the articles that are online. So yeah, they got the approval to impose an additional tax within the region. So everyone's subject to that additional 0.5% of sales tax if you buy product within that area. And then we bonded against that revenue stream that will be collected into the future for the next 30 years.
You can't impose other fees after the fact, right?
They'll have the ability to do other types of stuff, but not on existing citizens. It would be on somebody that wants to buy, if they wanted to, an apartment here or a condo here or something, right, within this area. So to be determined what they end up doing on that for other capital raises, but a big bond utilized through a PID. So once again, all these tools are being utilized a lot, but extremely beneficial tools for these awesome communities that we're seeing take place within our state. The goal and idea from our side is help real estate developers understand how they can utilize them appropriately, how municipalities and counties can see the effects of these tools be utilized in their jurisdiction and help citizens understand why these tools are being imposed and created and how they can be helpful to create the infrastructure that we need to deliver and make Utah better. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Sam. No, as you can see, high intellect, high class, great organization, good conversation. I would highly recommend that you guys take a window to sit down and meet up with Sam and his team and their group. Excellent group to work with. I've appreciated them every time I've engaged them. So we also, as a side note, will be doing if you didn't already know, every first Wednesday of the month, we're doing different classes like this. And so this is a series of events that we'll be doing ongoing that will help people learn more and more about land development so that they're more intelligent as they're trying to navigate the land development space. For example, there in the back, we have Ken Berg Engineering, probably one of the brighter minds in engineering space to date that I'm aware of, and I've used a lot of engineers as I've done a lot of development. So he's going to be teaching as well on the engineering sides of land development. We've given him some topics that we want him to talk to. And so that's going to happen in November. We have in October flagship Cameron Spencer. They're going to come and talk about the land development process and working with cities and with contractors and sub bases and how to go through that process and doing bids and budgets and all sorts of good stuff. So we want everyone, by the time they're done reviewing the content and this information, that they'll feel merited in saying that they're a bona fide developer. That's our goal, truth. I made a goal years ago that when I got into the space, if I got in and I was successful, that I would give back to those trying to get in, as well as the community, so that people do it at a higher level of success and capacity. And so that's our goal and effort here, is to push to help you guys be more successful. And you can find that. I think, Leland, you added a slide here. So we have all of the content and everything that we're going to be putting together here. You can take a look at that and get a gauge on what we're trying to do to give back to people trying to learn the land development space. So any questions for Sam? I know you guys just clapped for him, but I wanted to give any more, another window in case you guys did have a question. Yes, Sam, go ahead. And
what's the cost of a PID? Like,
To issue bonds?
to do, is there, fees to, pay to somebody to get it done, I guess?
Yeah, so if you're the borrower of a PID, you're paying the cost of interest. The interest for...
The initial actual creation of PID.
Oh, probably like $10,000 to go get it created, ish.
And you pay a specialty company to do that?
They're typically you need district counsel and your engineer to help you put together some of the legal documents to create one. But once again, they work with you pretty well, so you might be $5,000 to $10,000 in to go get one created. But once again, I'm just going to emphasize this, and I didn't emphasize this before. I think it's very important. These tools are not meant to be used for any real estate project in the state. If you bring a 50-lot development and you ask me, is a PID the right tool? I'm going to say absolutely not. You go look at those examples that we showed up on the screen. Where PIDs are being utilized is on 1,000-unit developments, 600-unit developments, 17,000-unit developments. Right? We're talking about really substantial projects where these tools are needed to deliver offsite improvements to be able to have these homes here in projects.
Are you going to be sharing that presentation slide?
Yeah. Yep. So anyways, utilize them. Go ahead.
Who's the typical point person on a PID? Because you showed your examples and they had 5 different builder groups or
The people that you saw in there were typically buyers of lots within the development. The master development people are just local real estate developers, some known names. You guys could probably, you'd know them, you know, the Boyers, the Gardners, the Flagships, but there's also a lot of developers that are kind of do their own thing and then sell lots to big builders. World's pretty vast out there. It's exciting though. It's good stuff. But once again, yeah, if I would tell a local municipality pretty quick, this is not the right project for a PID, the answer should be no. And we'll say that to our client before it even gets to the municipality, where we'll just say, look, this is not the right tool, go find something else, right? And municipalities don't always get to see us doing that, right? They think we're bringing them all the projects, utilize this as much as possible, and the answer is we don't. And that's why you're only seeing them for big ones.
Cool. Lastly, we got some snacks, and you guys can network and mingle amongst yourselves, so appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you. I think the next one is October, I think it's 6th. It's the first, whatever the first Wednesday is in October. So we'll probably email all you guys some information on that. Be really cool and just as insightful. And then November's is going to be Ken Berg. And I highly recommend you guys show up for that and engage Ken as far as his success and different things. He's done a lot of different stuff. So appreciate you guys coming. Thank you.